What if everything that looks like a threat is actually a mirror? Could it be that the world feels hostile only because you're seeing your own attack thoughts reflected back to you? Today we're contemplating lesson 22. What I see is a form of vengeance. This lesson names the emotional logic that the ego uses to navigate the world. The perceptual error that it's aiming to undo is this: you believe the world is attacking you first, and your retaliatory thoughts follow. In truth, it isn't like that. Attack originates in thought. Once projected, it must be perceived as external. Otherwise, the ego would have to face itself. So the mind performs a reversal. Your anger is projected outward first. Then the projection is seen out there as a threat. That threat justifies your defense, and your defense reinforces the attack. This is the closed loop of ego perception. This is also why the world can feel brutal and unfair and dangerous, even when nothing overt is happening. In many of our conversations, we've looked around and said, wait, is there any saber-toothed tiger waiting to pounce at me? And if not, then how could it be that here, sitting in the comfort of my own home, I feel threat, danger, stress, anxiety, fear? The reason is this: you are walking through a fantasy of retaliation and mistaking that fantasy for perception. The lesson, in fact, calls this a savage fantasy for a reason. It consumes attention, it populates your world with enemies, and it clearly leaves no room for peace. The real shock here isn't that vengeance exists. It's that you made what you fear. I've heard a mentor say in the past that fear is a misuse of imagination. So we are using our imagination to project a fantasy of attack, defense, retaliation, threat, not consciously, mechanically. So everything you see as threatening is actually attack thoughts turned around and reflected back. And this lesson isn't shaming us for wanting to escape this vicious cycle. It actually celebrates this desire. Because the moment you ask, is this the world that I really want to see? Now you step out of the cycle and into witnessing and choice. And once outside the cycle, another way of seeing truly becomes possible. So before we go deeper into dialogue, I want to invite you to take this moment to take a deep, slow, and full breath. Really allowing your body to open into spaciousness, into the immutable safety of this now moment. And as you rest here, place the central thought of today's lesson in your mind. What I see is a form of vengeance. With your eyes open but soft, look around and see if you can come into contact with the possibility that this statement is true. look about you slowly and simply notice, can you see it? Take these next few moments and look at your life through this lens. And now let's unfold our contemplation into dialogue. And the very first question that I want to ask you, Shanti, is why does the Course use the word vengeance to describe how we see the world?
That's a powerful choice of words, isn't it? Vengeance feels so intense for something we might think of as everyday perception. What stands out to you about that framing?
Well, yeah, I mean, no one really thinks about what I see as a form of vengeance when they are looking out at the world or at other people. What do you see in this specific choice of words?
It feels like the Course is calling out something hidden in plain sight. When we judge, interpret, categorize, isn't there a part of us that's actually getting even with what we perceive? Like, we're not just seeing, we're punishing with our interpretations.
Yeah, I was reflecting on this the other day and I saw that, so much of our thoughts overall, whether it's thoughts about planning or organizing or preparing or even wanting to create and put something out on the world, so much is influenced by fear. And then, of course, naturally, when we are in fear, well, there's an aspect of fear that is about defense. And naturally, if something is fearful and requires defense, then it goes to say that it is vengeful.
That makes sense. Fear does feel like it's protecting us from something, like getting even with what's perceived as a threat. So everything we think and feel is almost a defensive attack? That's kind of unsettling to see how much vengeance is hidden in just being alive.
Yeah, and it's not, of course, like a conscious vengeance. And so this is what I think is the real power of this lesson. Like you said, it's calling out something hidden in plain sight. If we really slow down and we look at what's motivating our thoughts, the thought system itself of separation, well, then we see that at the core of it isn't love, is it?
Exactly. It's like vengeance isn't some dramatic emotion we feel sometimes. It's actually the underlying mechanism of separation itself. The separation feels threatening to the ego, so of course it would retaliate. That threat feels like it needs revenge to set things right. It's not conscious, but it's constant.
And the fact that it's constant, I think, is why it is so easily missed. So, how does projecting anger onto the world make us feel like we're under attack?
That's a good question. I'm noticing that when we blame others, we feel like victims. But if everything's already a form of vengeance, then everyone's reacting to perceived threats. So it's this endless loop where nobody's actually initiating anything. Everyone's just reacting to what they think they're defending against.
So, open that a little bit deeper then. Like, why does the mind experience its own aggression as, well, self defense, essentially?
The mind loves a good story about being the victim. It feels justified then, doesn't it? But when we're being vengeful, aren't we actually the ones making the first move? By seeing the world as hostile, we're already reacting. The aggression becomes disguised as a response when really it's the original act.
Help us to really catch this mechanism in real time with an example.
Okay, here's something that feels immediate to me. Someone cuts you off in traffic and your first thought is, that person's an idiot. The anger is instant, right? But if we pull back, isn't that anger actually a retaliation for being inconvenienced? The road isn't taking something from you, you're interpreting it that way.
Yes, and then go on. Really expose more of the fallacy of the thought.
The mind jumps to, they did something to me, but that's not actually happening. You're making it about a personal attack. They aren't out to get you. That impulse is actually just your mind automatically seeking somewhere to land the blame rather than just seeing it as a moment.
So it's almost like we got this hand of cards, and all the cards are blame cards. And so it's like we're just, so to speak, itching for an opportunity to unload one of our cards. Would you say that that's a good metaphor?
I love that. We're walking around with a deck of blame cards and looking for any excuse to play one. It makes the whole thing seem so automatic. The brain doesn't even have to think. It just goes to vengeance naturally.
Yeah, I think this is why the world is termed as insane within the Course. Because, this blame game that is constantly being played out completely mechanically in many cases and unconsciously is something that our society just is operating within as if it's normal.
It is kind of insane when you really see it happening mechanically over and over. Everyone's operating from this same faulty program without any awareness of it. And then we wonder why we feel stressed or unhappy. It's like we're trying to fix something that can actually be fixed from within that system.
I'm noticing there's a temptation for this, right? There's something that is making us, so to speak, quote unquote, making us choose this mode over peace. And why do you think that being right in this way, being right about being a victim or being threatened, why does being right often feel safer almost than being at peace?
That's such a good question. Rightness feels like control, doesn't it? When we feel attacked, seeing ourselves as right makes us feel strong against an enemy instead of helpless against some invisible threat. Peace doesn't offer that shield, does it? Peace just accepts.
So what is it that this sense of self is actually protecting by seeing threat in the world?
That's hitting me. I think it's protecting its story. When we feel attacked, the ego gets to be the defender, the martyr, the wounded hero. The ego gets to be special. Peace, again, would mean that there's no one to defend, no story to protect.
So what aspect of our identity would dissolve if the war ended?
Everything we think makes us unique and important. Specialness, the right to be happy, feeling entitled to certain outcomes, righteous indignation, without external threats and moral comparisons to others. Those things collapse because there's no opposition left.
Well,
Okay.
Yeah, I could see that. I wonder how this ties into, in the lessons emphasizing that everything we see is perishable. Why do you think that emphasis is there?
I think the lesson is saying the threats that our mind clings to have no lasting reality. Everything we see is impermanent, so there's nothing to protect. Why defend something that won't even exist forever anyway? It feels kind of pointless when you put it that way.
Yeah, I guess on a very short time spectrum, like, if we see like, oh, there's a leaf blowing in the wind, and we don't want to necessarily save that leaf because it's dissolving, even, as the moment unfolds, right? It's blowing away, etc. But when the time horizon stretches and it seems like, okay, well, we have years or our whole lifetime ahead of us, then the idea of protecting, defending, etc., seems to carry much more weight.
Yes, exactly. It feels so real when we're thinking in years instead of moments. So it's like our brains get comfortable keeping vigilance high all the time because our sense of self feels so long term and therefore valuable. But what if it really isn't actually that long? What if our whole self is just as fleeting as the wind blowing the leaf?
I think this is the revelation, right, that we are being gently guided to, is that there is no years. That sense of self is being projected now into a fantasy of being around for years. We know very well that that has no fundamental reality, because you might think that you're going to be here for years and the next moment you're not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm noticing the paradox. Our deepest sense of certainty is that we know we won't be here forever. But all that fear and defensiveness happens as if we somehow have time on our side. Like we're building up defenses for a future that may never come.
Exactly. We're preparing for a future that doesn't exist and may never exist. And the truth is that it's just this moment in which we experience ourselves. And, if we consider the impermanence of this moment to moment, really almost like dissolving, right? In each moment, like a snowflake, is impermanence itself frightening? Or is it the meaning that we give it?
I think it's the meaning we give it, definitely. The impermanence isn't frightening on its own, it just is. But when our sense of self wants to stay here longer or wants to matter more, that's when the impermanence feels like a threat. It's the grasping that feels terrifying, not the melting.
Yeah. It's so funny that we see, the impermanence of all life around us, and we watch it, and sunrise and sunset and seasons, and we're like, ah, beautiful. And then as it comes to our sense of self, we're clinging on to this idea of continuity.
Right? It's like we can see the truth everywhere else, appreciate the whole cosmic dance of coming and going, but when it touches our own experience, we go rigid. It's so human to notice it everywhere, but not see how it applies to us.
So let's kind of touch back into that savage fantasy that this lesson is talking about. What do you think becomes possible when we no longer need to defend against an enemy?
Oh, that feels transformative. Without defending, we can actually see clearly instead of projecting fear onto what's happening. What we're responding to shifts from an image of threat to just what is. And maybe that's when presence, maybe even joy, becomes unavoidable.
Yeah, I love that. What we can do to conclude this episode is just engage that last question of the lesson, right? Is this the world I really want to see?
That's beautiful. Taking that pause to meet the truth of the question directly. I'm getting this deep sense that the real invitation here is to ask ourselves honestly, what would we choose if we weren't afraid? Like, if the story of vengeance didn't seem so compelling, the clarity can just emerge.
Yeah. So let's do this. let's take a few moments of silence to really listen into our own inner answer to this one. Is this the world I really want to see? Simply ask the question, and now let us go into the silence.